What's going on YouTube? It's your boy King Sway back at you with another reaction video. Today we watching 12 scary short stories by my son Mr. Ballin. Like he does like mad like scary what you call it? Like I forget the word right now, but like you know like Bigfoot and all that like scary stories, like the paranormal stuff like that, of like situations that happen in real life that may or may not be true, or rumors and such like that. And his videos is mad interesting. Like I just started watching him like maybe last month, and I tune in once in a while. A little bit interesting, cause I used to watch like scary stuff as a kid in my art teacher's class at lunch back in like 7th grade. It was mad lit. But let's get in the video. I'm talking too much.
This is why parents should believe their kids. In 2010, a 15-year-old boy started to notice that the door to his attic, which was in his bedroom, was always open. One day, when his mom's giving him a hard time about being lazy, he's like, "Well, you're one to talk. You always leave my attic door open." She's like, "I haven't touched your attic door in months, and nobody else has either." Not easily frightened, the boy decides to leave the attic door open. And so he's laying in bed, and he kind of looks over at the door, and standing in the door frame is a figure staring right at him. He bolts, tells his parents, they don't believe him, and then 6 months later they move anyway. A few years later, the boy discovers his favorite teacher actually moved into his old house, and so he jokingly asks her, "You ever see any ghosts walking around your attic?" Her face got completely serious, and she's like, "As soon as we moved in, the door to the attic kept opening, so we investigated and we found a trap door that led onto the roof. Someone had been crawling in through that entrance and living in the attic for years." This is why you always say yes to Tandoori Chicken. In 2012, a high school tutor and her student stayed up so late one night studying that by the time they were done, the buses had stopped running. Without another way home, the student asked if he could stay the night at her place. Reluctantly, she agreed. When they got back to the apartment, she fell asleep on her bed and he fell asleep on a blanket next to her bed on the ground. A few hours later, she wakes up to the boy standing awkwardly in the middle of the room with a very strange look on his face. She asks him, "What's wrong?" He looks at her and says, "I'm really hungry. Let's go get some tandoori chicken." Confused, she says, "It's 2 a.m. Just get a snack in the cupboard." And he grabs her by the arm and he says, "No, we are getting tandoori chicken right now." And he yanks her from the bed. Feeling totally caught off guard by this whole situation, she goes into the hall with the boy, and as soon as the door shuts behind them, she can tell that he is terrified. He looks at her and just says, "I'm not actually hungry. When I woke up, there was someone under your bed." Yes, the picture at the end is real. In 1876, a woman from a very prominent family in Paris goes missing. After years go by and no one has a clue what happened to this woman, friends and family ultimately mourn her death and move on. 25 years later, and this anonymous letter shows up on the Attorney General's desk, claiming that the missing woman's family had a secret. Intrigued by the letter, the police go to the family's home, show it to them, and ask to search the property, to which they say, "Go for it." They search, they don't find anything, but on the way out, they notice something very peculiar. At the end of some stairs was a door that was padlocked shut. When the family refused to open it, the police break it down and make a horrifying discovery. Cowering on a rotten straw mattress in a pitch-black room was the missing woman, now 50 years old and extremely malnourished. Her mother had imprisoned her there after they had fought over her boyfriend, and she had not seen sunlight or another human being in 25 years. This is why you should always trust your gut. In the early 1970s, a college student decided to hitchhike his way home after class. A car pulls up, a man offers him a ride, and he climbs in. As soon as the car started moving, the student felt totally uneasy, like something was wrong, but he couldn't quite place it. Without saying anything, he waited till the next time they slowed down, and he flung the door open and ran away. 2 years later, he's flicking through TV channels when he comes across this special interview with a death row inmate. And it's just the audio recording, so he hears the interviewer ask the inmate, "Why did you remove all the door handles inside of your car?" The man just goes, "Well, the first time I tried to kill someone, I picked up a college hitchhiker who got smart at some point and jumped out of my car. So, lesson learned, remove all the door handles." When they showed his picture, the student knew immediately that he was supposed to be the first victim of John Wayne Gacy, aka the killer clown, who had killed over 30 men and boys in his clown room and stuffed them into his basement. Don't read the comments, it will spoil the very satisfying ending. In 1999, a 20-year-old kid was obsessed with this 16-year-old girl, but she wasn't into him. Frustrated, he breaks into her house and demands that she dates him. When she refuses, he kills her. And then he kills her 14-year-old sister too. Or so he thought. The 14-year-old survived and easily identified Paul Powell as the killer. Powell showed no remorse in court and even called the victims stupid. When he was sentenced to death, though, his attitude changed and he cried and begged for mercy. And unfortunately, mercy would come in the form of a legal loophole that switched his death sentence to a life sentence. Believing he was saved from the death penalty because of double jeopardy, he wrote this ridiculous letter to the prosecuting attorney, basically admitting to every single detail of the crime, kind of bragging about what he got away with. So the attorney just takes the letter, gives it to a judge. The judge looks at it and says, "Yup, there's new evidence here," orders a new trial, and immediately this dude is resentenced to death. And a few months later, this lowlife was executed. This is why you should always watch videos to the end. In 2003, a woman came home to her apartment to see that her door was unlocked. She went inside, nothing was missing, so she assumed she must have left it open. When it happened a few more times, but still nothing was missing in her apartment, she went out and got a camera, set it up in her apartment aimed at the front door. The next day, her door was unlocked, so she reviewed the footage. She watches in horror as late in the night, her front door opens and in walks this tall, creepy man who looks around and then walks towards her bedroom off camera. She immediately sprints out of her apartment and calls the police, who show up and tell her to go back in her apartment and just try to stay calm, and that they would put an officer right outside her door so she's safe. As she's sitting on the bed, totally traumatized, she realizes something. She only saw him enter her apartment on that video. She doesn't know if he actually left. As she's sitting there, she feels breathing on her ankles. She runs out, the cop comes in, and he finds the tall, creepy man under the bed holding a knife and a camera. This is why you should never watch my videos before going to bed. In 1986, a young girl opens her closet to find a man wearing a dress and holding an axe. He grabs her and ties her up, and then walks around the house and does the same thing to the rest of her family. While the guy is ransacking their house, one of the kids breaks free, runs next door, and tells his neighbor. The neighbor calls the cops show up, the family's saved, but the guy is nowhere to be found. The family leaves the house and stays with relatives in hopes that they'll catch this guy before they have to go back. But after a few weeks, they haven't caught him, there aren't any leads, and they say, you know what, we'll go back to our house anyways. As the family's pulling back into their driveway, the father looks up at one of the windows and sees for a split second the head of the man with the dress in their bedroom. They call the police, who go in and find pennies glued to the ceiling and weird writing all over the house, but they can't find this crazy guy. Until one of the officers found a secret crawl space in the basement, where psychotic killer Danny LaPlante had been living for 2 months. Yes, this really did happen. In 2015, a man woke up to a strange Postit note sitting on his desk. On it was a to-do list that he didn't recognize in handwriting that didn't look like his. Since he was up late the night before doing some work, he assumed he must have written out the list when he was half asleep and kind of forgot about it, so he just crumples it up and throws it away. 2 weeks later, he wakes up to dozens of these Post-it notes all over his wall, and they're all blank except for one that, in the same weird handwriting, says, "Our landlord isn't letting me talk to you." Now feeling totally freaked out that some crazy person is crawling around his apartment at night, he starts looking for signs of a break-in, but there aren't any. Instead of calling the police, he shares his experience on Reddit asking for help, and one user's comment literally saves his life. Turns out the man was writing the notes to himself and then forgetting, because his brain was slowly dying due to a carbon monoxide leak that was only discovered because a user suggested he install a detector. This is why you should never stay in sketchy motels. In 2005, a young woman on a solo road trip across the country decided to stop for the night. The first place she sees is the Mountaintop Motel. It looked pretty cheap, but she was tired, so she said good enough. The check-in guy eyed her up and down very uncomfortably and then asked her if she was traveling alone. She ignores the question, pays for her room, and then walks away with the key. When she gets inside her room and sees there are literally cockroaches in her bed, she says nope and decides to sleep in her car in the parking lot. Around 3 a.m., she wakes up to see the check-in guy using his own keys to get into the motel room she was supposed to be in. A few minutes later, he storms out and slams the door and starts walking towards her car. Terrified, she hides under her blanket as the man tries to open her car doors but can't and walks away. She speeds off and calls her friend and asks her to look up the address of Mountaintop Motel so she can give it to police. Her friend's quiet for a second and then just says, "The Mountaintop Motel closed a week ago." This is why you should be careful what you put in the mail. In 2015, a man was asked by his neighbor to collect his mail while he was gone for a few weeks. A few days later, a large package arrives on his neighbor's front porch. The man can barely lift it, but gets over to his garage where he accidentally drops it and hears something break inside. Hoping his neighbor would think the damage occurred en route, he closes his squeaky garage door and forgets about it. But over the next couple of days, whatever was in that package started to smell so bad that he decides to open it up. Inside were two very important finds: his neighbor, who was dead, and a camera that was still recording. The police bring the man in for questioning and show him what was on the camera inside the box. It starts with his neighbor talking to the camera about how excited he is to mail himself home for his YouTube channel. Then, police fast forward to the very end where they see that the neighbor is now sleeping in the box, and then suddenly gets dropped and you hear a crack, and that's his neck breaking. And then you hear a squeaky garage door close. This is why you should always watch what you say in public. In the late 1970s, a man began breaking into homes in order to assault the families inside of them. After dozens of attacks and no suspects in custody, the citizens were totally on edge, so the police decide to host this town hall meeting so they can discuss the situation out in public. During the meeting, a local man stands up and says, "I would totally kick that guy's ass if he came anywhere near my wife." Then, in a crazy, ironic turn of events, that angry man and his wife become the next victims. Following their assault, the attacker completely changes his behavior. He goes from kind of petty home invader to full-blown serial killer, targeting only married men and their wives. When decades later, police finally identified Joseph D'Angelo as the killer, as they're going through old photos from the case, they make a startling discovery about his motives. D'Angelo had attended that town hall meeting. This is why you should always be scared of clowns. In 2004, a babysitter had just sat down to watch TV before the parents got back when she noticed something. In the corner of the room was a large clown statue that, no matter how she positioned herself, seemed like it was staring right at her. As she's looking at it, the father calls to check in on the kids. She tells him everything is fine, and right before they're about to hang up, she says, "Why do you have a huge clown statue in your TV room?" There was silence on the phone, and then the father just says, "We don't own a clown statue." She immediately drops the phone, runs upstairs, gets the kids, runs outside, calls the cops. Cops go in and come out with this guy. As the police are taking the clown away, one of the officers comes over to the girl and with a very grim look on his face just says, "We found him underneath one of the kids' beds. He was holding a sharpened screwdriver."
I had nothing to say this whole video, because, bro, like, the stuff that he be saying just be blowing my mind. Like, damn. But I'm gonna catch y'all in the next reaction. Hopefully he didn't scare you out of death, but I'm gonna catch y'all in the next reaction. Peace.